They didn't even look at me when they voted. That was the part I couldn't shake. 29 civilizations, each with their own flags, their own frequencies, their own particular brand of arrogance, and not one of them turned toward the glass observation box where I was sitting. Not one set of eyes or optical sensors, or whatever passed for eyes among the Drell and the Vathai, drifted upward for even half a second. We were already furniture. I am Reis Akafer, former UN diplomatic liaison, currently humanity's only representative on the wrong side of a vote that just decided the fate of 8 billion people, and I was watching it happen from a glass box above the chamber floor like a fish in an aquarium that nobody wanted to feed anymore. The chamber was called the Hall of Common Accord. I had always found that name aggressively optimistic. It was a wide, low room with walls that shifted color depending on the ambient emotional register of the species present. The conclave had installed some kind of atmospheric sensor system 3 centuries ago that was meant to promote empathy. Right now the walls were a calm, satisfied amber. Amber as if this were pleasant. The vote counter, a slender administrative unit that belonged to no species and served all of them, read the final tally aloud in the 6 primary conclave languages. I only understood 2 of them fluently, but I didn't need translation for numbers. 29-2. Resolution 7 Omega passed. Earth was to be quarantined, exiled, severed from all trade routes, all communications relays, all jump gate access within conclave jurisdiction. The official language of the resolution used the word precautionary isolation. Diplomatic language is a remarkable thing. You can end a civilization with it and still sound reasonable. The stated reason, the one entered into formal record, was that humanity represented an unacceptable volatility index. Too warlike, too unpredictable, too loud in the frequencies that the conclave monitored for signs of imminent conflict. What they didn't say, what I had spent 4 years learning to read in the silences between conclave sessions, was simpler. We made them nervous in a way they didn't have vocabulary for. We'd arrived at the galactic table 30 years ago with no history of interstellar contact, no guidance from a patron species, no roadmap, and we'd still managed to be annoying enough in 3 decades to warrant a formal vote. I had to admit there was something almost impressive about that. Ambassador Priya Subramaniam was in the chamber floor below me. She was the one who should have been in my position, the one staring up at the vote tally, but she'd insisted I take the gallery while she held the floor position. Protocol, she'd said. Someone needed to observe without the burden of being observed in return. I watched her receive the verdict. She was standing when the counter finished reading. She didn't sit down. She didn't move at all. Her hands were at her sides, perfectly still, and her face held the expression of a person who had decided, at some point before entering this room, that the only currency she had left was composure. I had been married to someone who held herself like that. I looked away. The 2 dissenting votes were logged without ceremony. The first came from the Keth, a species that had always unsettled the other conclave members in ways no one articulated clearly. They were tall and thin and moved as though gravity was a suggestion rather than a rule. Their representative, whose name I had never successfully pronounced, had submitted a sealed written dissent rather than a verbal one. No explanation. The sealed document would sit in the conclave archive for however long archives survived, unexplained. The second dissent was stranger. It came from a delegate I didn't recognize. The chamber record logged the species as Varii, aquatic, ancient, almost never present at conclave sessions. Their delegate had submitted a sealed dissent as well, but unlike the Keth representative, this one had stood when the tally was announced. Just for a moment. Long enough for me to see a face that looked like it had been paying attention to things far longer than this particular room had existed. Then she left, didn't look up, didn't look at Priya, just walked out of the chamber through a side passage that I hadn't noticed before. I filed that, I file things. It's the only skill that has kept me employed. The exile order activated in 72 hours. That window was not mercy. I understood that before the session even closed. It was logistics. The conclave needed time to coordinate the gate lockdowns across 7 systems simultaneously, and 72 hours was the minimum operational margin. We were being given the time it took to lock us out, not the time it took to say goodbye. 3 of humanity's off-world colonies would be caught on the wrong side of the gates when they closed. Kepler Bravo, a settlement of roughly 200,000 people built on a planet that smelled like rain and sulfur in equal measure. The Dust Stations, a cluster of mining platforms in a system with no proper name in any Earth language, housing another 140,000. And a small research outpost on a moon that most conclave maps didn't bother labeling, carrying maybe 3,000 people who had gone out there specifically to be left alone. 343,000 people. I sat in the observation gallery after everyone else had left and did the math without wanting to. An administrator came in to clear the room. It was a Drell, 7 feet of gray cartilage in a diplomatic suit that must have cost more than my annual operating budget. It moved with the particular efficiency of a species that had been running bureaucracies since before humans had written language. "The gallery is closed," it said. Its translator rendered the words in flat, accented English. "Please vacate." I didn't move. It waited. Species that have been in administration long enough develop patience as a reflex. "You have no standing here," it said finally. I looked at it. "No," I said, "we have no seat, that's different." It left before I did. I sat there for another hour. The walls had shifted from amber to a pale, indifferent gray. I watched Earth's flag, still displayed on the chamber's outer registry panel, not yet removed because no protocol had been filed for its removal yet. And I thought about 29 civilizations that had looked at humanity and made a decision without hesitation. There was a question I didn't ask myself directly. I kept it at the edge of my thinking, the way you keep a sore tooth at the edge of your tongue, not pressing, just aware. 29 civilizations, each of them old enough to have survived their own violent centuries, each of them having made choices in their own histories that their own historians had spent generations defending or condemning. And they had looked at us and chosen exile without hesitation. I didn't examine that thought closely. I was not in the habit of examining things that couldn't be acted on. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked out of the gallery. 71 hours and 53 minutes left. Priya was waiting in the corridor outside. She had her tablet in one hand and a cup of something hot in the other, and she looked exactly the way she always looked after catastrophic meetings, like someone who had already moved 3 steps ahead and was waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. "The Secretary General wants a call," she said. "In an hour," I said. She nodded. She didn't ask what I was doing for that hour. We'd worked together long enough for her to know that I wasn't the kind of person who processed things out loud. "The Varii delegate," I said, "the one who submitted the sealed dissent." Priya's eyes shifted slightly. "What about her?" "I need to find her." "You have 71 hours. "Then I'd better start now." She handed me the hot cup without being asked. It tasted like heated aluminum and something vaguely floral, a conclave station blend that I had never liked and had been drinking for 4 years anyway. I walked down the corridor. The gate would close in 71 hours and 51 minutes. On the other side of it, 8 billion people were about to learn what the galaxy thought of them. I had a cup of bad tea, 1 diplomatic contact I hadn't spoken to, a crew of 11 on a ship that wasn't supposed to still be docked here, and an increasingly inconvenient refusal to accept the premise that a vote was the same thing as a verdict. Not my first funeral, I thought. I found a window at the end of the corridor. Stars outside, indifferent and numerous. The gate structure was visible at the edge of the frame, massive, geometric, lit with the conclave's operational lights in pale blue and gold. 71 hours. I finished the tea. Then I went to find the woman who had voted against the Exile and hadn't explained why. The Varii delegate's name, when I finally got a station directory to render it in phonetic standard, was something close to Amaveth. I shortened it to Amma in my head because I needed something I could think quickly, and she didn't object when I used it to her face, so I kept doing it. She was in a water-adjacent habitat on level 9 of Conclave Station 7, a corridor section that had been modified for aquatic species, with humidity so thick that walking through it felt like pressing through warm cloth. I arrived at her door looking approximately the way a person looks after walking through a cloud. She opened it before I knocked. Either the station had announced my arrival, or she had been expecting me, or the Varii had some perceptual range that made knocking redundant. I didn't ask. I was learning which questions were worth the breath. She was smaller than I had expected from the chamber. Compact, built in horizontal layers the way deepwater things are built, with skin that shifted between dark blue and a quiet green depending on how the light caught it. Her eyes were large and still, and the color of very old amber, not the satisfied amber of the conclave walls, but the kind of amber that has something suspended inside it. "Raise Akafar," she said. Her standard was precise and slightly formal, the way people speak a language they learned from documents rather than conversation. "Amaveth," I said. Something in her face shifted, not a smile exactly, but the structural equivalent of one. She stepped back to let me in. The habitat was spare, a low platform that served as seating, a shallow basin of water in the center of the room, a single shelf holding what appeared to be physical documents, actual paper, or something close to it, rolled and sealed with material I didn't recognize. I sat on the platform without being invited, because there was nowhere else, and we were past the point where pretending at politeness served either of us. "You voted against the Exile," I said. "Yes." "The Keth voted against it too." "Yes." "I need to understand why." She settled across from me, her lower half resting at the basin's edge. She was quiet for a moment in the way that wasn't hesitation, the way that is, instead, the careful selection of which truth to offer. "The Varii did not vote for humanity," she said. "We voted against the precedent." I waited. Exile resolutions require unanimous conclave agreement to be considered permanent under founding charter. 29 votes satisfies the operational threshold. It does not satisfy the permanence clause. She paused. The conclave's legal committee will take approximately 14 months to notice this. 14 months. I looked at her for a long moment. You left a gap in the resolution. The gap was already there, she said. We chose not to close it. Why? She looked at me the way old oceans look at new islands, patient, not particularly impressed, curious about duration. Because we have seen exile before, she said. Species that are quarantined either diminish or they harden. In 4,000 years of conclave record, we have not observed a third outcome. She paused. Your species arrived here 30 years ago without a patron, without a guide, without any of the traditional frameworks. You were already an irregularity. We were interested to see which outcome you would produce. I sat with that in the Keth. The Keth vote their own conscience, she said. We have never successfully determined what that conscience is based on. Before I could respond, my tablet vibrated. I glanced at it. A priority relay from the conclave gate authority, automated, flagging an attempted transit by a registered Earth vessel. One of the colony ships, trying to get through before the lockdown completed. I read the status update. One line, clean, administrative language. Transit attempt 1, successful. Transit attempt 2, Gate threshold exceeded. Vessel non-recoverable. Transit attempt 3. Gate threshold exceeded. Vessel non-recoverable. Non-recoverable. 2 ships, I read it once. I put the tablet face down on my knee. Amma watched me. She didn't ask. She filed it the way old things file things, deep and without comment. "How long have you been watching us?" I asked. My voice came out steady. I was grateful for that. "Since your first conclave application," she said. 31 years. And you never introduced yourself." There was nothing to say yet. She folded her hands in her lap. "There may be something now." I looked at the tablet face down on my knee. I thought about green ink. I thought about a set of pens I had carried in my breast pocket for 6 years, until the day I lost them on a shuttle out of Geneva and never found their equivalent. I kept reaching for them in moments like this one. The moment after a number stops being a number and becomes something you will carry for the rest of your life. "What is there to say?" I asked. "That the Varii are not conclave members in the traditional sense," she said. "We hold observer status. Our trade agreements are registered independently. Our navigation filings are our own." She paused. "We have corridors, Mr. HFY, routes that the conclave has not registered because we have not chosen to register them. Routes that connect points which the current gate network does not serve." The room was very quiet. "You're telling me there are ways through," I said. "I am telling you what the Varii have," she said carefully. "I am not telling you what to do with that information." I stood up. The humidity pressed against me. My jacket was damp through and I didn't care. "I need 40 hours, I said. "You have 32, she said. "After that, my schedule requires me to be elsewhere, and this conversation will not have occurred." I nodded. 32. She didn't see me out. I let myself back into the humid corridor and walked toward the station's main transit hub with my tablet in my hand, and the face-down number still sitting somewhere behind my sternum, where I was not going to look at it yet. The gate locked at hour 72, with a sound like the universe adjusting its collar. I was standing at the gate observation window on my ship when it happened. My crew, 11 people, most of whom had better options and had chosen not to take them, were distributed through the bridge and the communications bay, running the systems we were going to need and pretending not to be aware that we had just watched the largest door in human history close behind us. Our ship was called the Carver. It was a diplomatic support vessel, mid-range, built for endurance rather than speed, and it was technically, legally, a civilian craft operating under a commercial registry, because I had reflagged it 14 months ago during a routine administrative filing that no one had questioned, because routine administrative filings were the camouflage of the universe. I stood at the window and watched the gate go dark. Then I picked up the ship's comm and opened a channel to the stranded colonies. Static, then a carrier signal from Kepler Bravo. "This is HFY," I said. "I'm on the conclave side. I know what just happened. I need you to listen." A voice came back. A woman named Carol Devane, the administrative coordinator at Kepler Bravo's central hub, who I had spoken to exactly twice before this moment and who sounded, right now, like someone holding a very large weight with very level hands. "We're listening," she said. "You are not abandoned," I said. "Hold your position, maintain your resources, draw the line where you are. We will find it from the other side." A pause. "What does that mean?" Honestly, I wasn't entirely sure. "It means we're not done," I said. "That's enough for now." She was quiet for a moment, then understood. I closed the channel. My navigator, a compact and perpetually unruffled man named Owen Farrell, who had been with me since my second posting, and who expressed his full emotional range through eyebrow movement, was watching me from across the bridge. "So," he said, one eyebrow up, "what are we actually doing?" I sat down in the command chair. It creaked. It always creaked. I had filed a maintenance request for it 8 months ago and continued to file it monthly as a matter of personal principle. "We're going to build a door," I said. The other eyebrow went up, from inside the wall. "The Vari have corridors," I said. "The Keth have charts. We have 32 hours before Amma's schedule takes her elsewhere." I pulled up the navigation display. "And we have a crew that doesn't have anywhere better to be." Owen looked at the display, then at me, then back at the display. "Right," he said, and turned to his station. Outside, the gate sat dark and enormous and final-looking. I looked at it for a moment. Not my first funeral. But this one had a window in it. I just needed to find the frame. 6 months after the gate closed, the Conclave's analytical division released an internal report. I obtained a copy through a source I would not identify under any form of questioning, projecting humanity's likely behavioral trajectory over the following decade. The report was thorough. It was well-researched. It was also, in the way that confident predictions about human beings tend to be, entirely wrong. The projection assumed resource contraction within 4 months, followed by colony conflict within 8, followed by a formal petition for conditional conclave readmission within 12 to 18 months. The petition, the report assumed, would come at significant political concession, humanity bargaining from a position of near-total dependence, accepting whatever terms were offered, and the matter would be closed. I read this report on a Tuesday morning on Conclave Station 7, while eating something that resembled bread and drinking the heated aluminum tea I had decided to stop having. I made 3 notes in the margin. Then I filed the report in the same place I filed everything I wanted no one to find, the meal rotation folder on the Carver's Logistics Manifest, and went about my day. What the Conclave was watching, Earth's political structures, expecting them to fracture. What the Conclave was not watching, an asteroid in a system, 11 light towers from Kepler Bravo that had never been catalogued, because it was unremarkable in every observable way and remarkable in one way that was not observable, unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside that asteroid over the course of the previous 3 years, because I had started this before the vote, which was the only reason it was ready when we needed it, a communications array had been growing. Not loudly, not in any frequency that conclave monitoring equipment was calibrated to detect, because conclave monitoring equipment was designed to catch the kinds of signals that other conclave-adjacent species transmitted, and we had built ours to operate in the gaps. The gaps between standard frequencies, the gaps between standard protocols, the gaps that exist in any system built by people who assumed they already knew what they were looking for. My communications officer, Nina Ape, had designed it. She was the kind of engineer who found regulations interesting in the way a locksmith finds locks interesting, not as barriers, but as information about what the person who built them thought was important. She had spent 4 years on the Carver, and I had learned to give her a problem and then leave her alone until she came to find me. On month 4 post-exile, she came to find me. "Array is at full operational capacity," she said. She was standing in the doorway of my quarters with a tablet, and the expression she wore when something had worked exactly as designed, not excited, just settled, the way a person looks when the math comes out clean. "We're talking to Kepler Bravo, the dust stations, and the research outpost simultaneously. Encrypted. Stable. The Conclave's monitoring sweep passes through it every 6 hours and registers background noise." "How long can we maintain that?" "Until they recalibrate their sweep parameters," she said, "which will take them approximately." "Don't tell me," I said. "I want to be surprised when it runs out." She almost smiled. "It's going to be a while," she said. I nodded. "Tell Carol Devane the line is open." On the other side of that line, something interesting was happening. Humanity, cut off, had compressed. This is the word I kept coming back to. Not collapsed, not fractured, compressed. The way carbon compresses under sufficient pressure, not into nothing, but into something with different properties than it started with. 3 centuries of geopolitical competition, of nations pulling in 40 different directions, of institutions built to manage conflict rather than prevent it. All of that energy had nowhere to go except inward, and then, having pressed as far inward as it could, back outward in a single unified direction. The direction was, solve the problem. The specific problem was the gate. But underneath the specific problem was a deeper one that nobody said aloud, but that every policy meeting and engineering session and late-night comm relay was actually about. Prove that the conclave's vote had been a mistake. Not by arguing, not by petitioning. By making the argument irrelevant. Carol Devane, it turned out, was not merely an administrative coordinator. She had a background in structural engineering and a habit of solving problems by looking at what other people had decided were not problems. Under her direction, Kepler Bravo had converted 3 of its cargo bays into fabrication facilities within the first 6 weeks of Exile. Not weapons, infrastructure. Power distribution systems, water reclamation equipment, communication hardware. All the things a colony needs to stop depending on external supply chains. The dust stations were doing something similar, though with less elegance and considerably more argument about methodology, which was accurate to their character. The research outpost on the unlabeled moon had gone quiet for 2 weeks, and then transmitted a single data packet that contained what appeared to be a complete redesign of their atmospheric processing system. Nina looked at it for an hour, and then told me it was the most efficient design she'd seen outside of Keth engineering. I filed that in the same mental space as the Keth navigation charts and the Varii corridors, and did not yet examine what it added up to. The merchant corridor appeared in month 3. It was not a secret. That was important to understand. It was not some hidden back channel or prohibited route. It was simply a passage that existed in the space between conclave-registered trade lanes, used primarily by species and independent traders who had never formalized their conclave membership, and who moved goods through the galaxy the way water moves through rock, not through it, but around it, following the path of least bureaucratic resistance. Owen found it. He was the kind of navigator who read dead routes the way other people read histories, looking for what used to be there, and figuring out why it stopped being used, and whether those reasons still applied. Most of the reasons for the merchant corridor's low traffic turned out to be political history that was 3 centuries old and no longer relevant to anyone active in the current period. It connects to 7 independent system hubs, he told me, spreading the route overlay across the navigation display. None of them conclave members, 4 of them actively trading with species that are conclave adjacent, not full members, but in the economic orbit. Can we run it with the Carver? We can run it with anything that doesn't have a conclave transponder active, he said, which we technically don't, because our transponder is registered to a civilian commercial entity that predates the Exile order. I looked at the route. It did not connect directly to Earthside space, but it connected to the hubs, and the hubs connected to things, and things connected to other things, and that was how doors were built, not in one piece, but one frame at a time. File a transit intention, I said. Owen raised an eyebrow. With who? With the corridor's oldest active user, I said. Find out who that is. He found out. The oldest active merchant corridor user was a trade consortium run by a species called the Murath, 4-armed, quick-spoken, deeply uninterested in conclave politics, and deeply interested in reliable supply chains. Their coordinator was a woman whose name translated approximately as Bright River Running, and who went by the much more workable Brina in Standard. I calmed Brina on a Thursday afternoon from a cafe on Station 7 that smelled like heated metal and something sweet. She answered on the second signal. She was, I would learn, always on the second signal, present enough to take the call, disciplined enough not to appear urgent. HFY, she said, Earth-affiliated. Carver, I said, civilian registry. A pause, the kind of pause that is actually a calculation. What do you need? Access. Transit rights through the corridor and introduction to your other active users. Another pause. In exchange for what? Communication infrastructure, I said. The kind that works in frequencies your current equipment doesn't cover. She was quiet for 4 seconds. Come to Hub 3, she said. Bring your engineer. I brought Nina. The meeting at Hub 3 lasted 9 hours and produced a trade agreement that covered communication infrastructure, navigational data sharing, and mutual transit rights across 4 independent systems, completely legal, filed with the Hub 3 Independent Registry, which was not a conclave body and had no obligation to report to one. Timestamp to the day. On month 4, the conclave noticed something irregular in humanity's behavior patterns. Their monitoring reports began flagging anomalies, trade activity in systems adjacent to the exiled zone, communication traces that didn't match standard Earth-registered signals, resource stability in the stranded colonies that didn't match the projected depletion curves. They ran 7 investigations. I watched 2 of them from the cafe on Station 7. The investigators were methodical and thorough and were looking in all the right places by the standards of what they knew to look for. They checked the gate seals. They checked registered trade routes. They checked known communication frequencies. They didn't check the merchant corridor because the merchant corridor had never been conclave registered and therefore didn't exist in the frameworks their investigations were built on. They didn't check the asteroid array because it was operating in frequencies that their equipment registered as background noise, and nobody had thought to redefine the threshold for what counted as background noise. They didn't check the Keth navigation charts because those charts were filed in the Carver's meal rotation folder under a file name that translated, in the station's archiving language, as Protein Ration Inventory, Cycle 14. A conclave inspector boarded the Carver on month 5. Routine check. He was a Vathai, a species with 4 highly articulated arms that they used for simultaneous multi-surface document processing, which made them excellent inspectors and deeply unsettling dinner companions. He went through the ship with the careful attention of someone who had been told, quietly, to find something. He went through the bridge, the communications bay, the cargo hold, the personal quarters, mine included, which I had prepared for exactly this possibility, by ensuring that the only interesting thing in it was a physical photograph of my daughter at age 7, which he looked at for a moment and then set down carefully, which told me something about Vathai I hadn't known before. He got to the logistics manifest, opened it, scrolled through. Protein Ration Inventory, Meal Rotation Cycle 14. I was sitting across the table from him at the time. I began talking about the protein ration shortage in Sector 9, a real shortage, well documented, genuinely irritating to anyone running a crew in this region. And I kept talking. I talked about supply chain degradation timescales and the particular misery of the substitute rations that had been available since the shortage began, and the impact on crew morale, and my 3 failed attempts to source alternatives through the station commissary. I maintained eye contact. I gestured with genuine feeling, because I did genuinely find the protein ration shortage annoying. He closed the folder. "Your maintenance logs are incomplete," he said. "I've been filing requests for 8 months," I said. "The station maintenance queue is." "File again," he said, and stood up and left the ship. I sat at the table after he left. Owen appeared in the doorway, one eyebrow elevated to a degree that communicated both relief and the question of whether relief was appropriate yet. "Not yet," I said, "but soon." I went to find a window. Outside, the gate structure sat in its permanent, expensive darkness. 9 months of eating borrowed air. Month 9 was coming, and I was almost ready to knock on the front door. I had 7 documents. That was what it came down to. 7 pieces of paper, actual printed documents, because physical paper in a conclave session carried a weight that digital filing didn't, a statement of permanence that data packets couldn't replicate. I had printed them on the Carver's single functioning printer, which jammed twice in the process, because nothing about this was going to be elegant. The documents were: 1. A trade agreement with the Murath Consortium, signed and countersigned, covering communication infrastructure and mutual transit rights across 4 independent systems. 2. A trade agreement with the Second Merchant Corridor Partner, a quiet collective called the SEN, covering navigational data exchange. 3. A trade agreement with a small independent trading station called Waymark, covering resource exchange protocols. 4. A trade agreement with Ivarii, covering communication relay access. 3 of those 4 trading partners were supposedly under conclave exclusivity contracts. Supposedly, but their conclave exclusivity contracts covered trade within conclave-registered space and through conclave-registered channels. The merchant corridor was neither. The transactions had occurred outside conclave jurisdiction. Completely legal. 5. Navigational filings for 3 unmapped jump corridors, the Keth corridors, submitted to the Hub 3 independent registry. Properly filed. Timestamped to day 16 of the Exile period, which meant they had been filed before any of the conclave's investigation protocols had been activated. 6. A formal communication network declaration, registering the asteroid array as a civilian communication infrastructure under independent commercial operation. The filing referenced Hub 3's registry framework. Timestamp, day 1 of the Exile period. 7. A humanitarian status filing for the 343,000 colonial residents currently located in exiled space, citing the Conclave's own founding charter provisions regarding civilian non-combatant protections during jurisdictional disputes. That last one was Owen's idea. He had found it at 3 in the morning on month 7 and come to wake me up to show me, which was the most animated I had ever seen him. The provision was old, written into the founding charter in the period before the Conclave had developed its current gate-based exclusion protocols, when exile meant physical blockade, and the distinction between political and civilian impact was impossible to avoid. It hadn't been invoked in 140 years. It was still there. I walked into the conclave chamber on a Wednesday at 9 in the morning, station time. I had taken the service entrance because the main entrance required a visitor credential I no longer held. The service entrance required a maintenance pass, which I still held because it was attached to the Carver's ongoing maintenance request, and no one had processed the maintenance request, and therefore no one had closed the associated credentials. I pulled out a chair, sat down, placed my hands flat on the table. The chamber was in session, a routine resource allocation discussion that had been going on for 2 days. The delegates around the table did not immediately react. This is the thing about entering a space with sufficient calm. The first 30 seconds, people assume you belong there. By second 31, the senior Drell administrator, the same one who had told me to vacate the gallery 9 months ago, had identified me and was communicating in rapid multi-frequency bursts that I assumed were the administrative equivalent of an alert. I placed the 7 documents on the table in a row. "I have filings to submit to the conclave record," I said. The chamber went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when the script has run out. I didn't give a speech. I had prepared one, in the same way I maintained the maintenance request as a matter of principle, but I didn't use it. Speeches were for situations where you needed to persuade people. I wasn't here to persuade anyone of anything. I was here to present facts. I walked through the documents, one at a time. I described each one in precise, plain language. I cited the relevant conclave charter provisions. I noted the timestamps. I referenced the legal frameworks, including the ones I knew the conclave's legal committee had not yet reviewed. When I reached Document 7, the humanitarian filing, I set it down last and said, 343,000 civilians are currently located in exiled space. The founding charter's civilian protection provisions apply. This filing initiates mandatory review proceedings, which the charter requires to be completed within 45 days. The senior Drell administrator said, "You have no standing in this chamber." Document 1 establishes trade relationship status with 4 independently registered entities, I said. Under the conclave's own charter, commercial entities with registered trade relationships hold observer status equivalent to my previous diplomatic accreditation. My accreditation was revoked with the Exile order. My observer status, derived from independent commercial relationships, was not. A pause that lasted approximately the time it takes for everyone in a room to run the same calculation and arrive at the same uncomfortable answer. Furthermore, I said, the jump corridors registered in Document 5 operate outside conclave jurisdiction. Our transit of those corridors at no point violated the Exile Resolution's territorial provisions, because the territorial provisions apply to conclave-registered space, and those corridors are not registered conclave space. I paused. We were never inside your system, I said, so your exile was never ours to accept. The room held. Someone, I couldn't immediately identify the species, said something in a language my translator didn't cover. 3 others responded. The Drell administrator was communicating in multi-frequency bursts again. Amma was seated in the far left section of the chamber. She was present in formal capacity today, which was unusual for the Varii. The first time they had sent a delegate to a full chamber session in, by my count, 4 years. She was watching me with those old amber eyes, patient, not particularly impressed, curious about duration. When the chamber called a procedural recess, 45 minutes, standard, she crossed the room and stood beside me. The legal committee will review your filings, she said quietly. It will take time. 14 months, I said. For the permanence clause question, I know. Less now, she said. You've accelerated certain processes. I nodded. Outside the chamber's high windows, the gate structure was visible, still dark, still enormous. But it no longer looked like a wall to me. It looked like what it was, a piece of infrastructure. Expensive, yes. Powerful, yes. But infrastructure. Built by people who had decided certain things were not worth looking for. We had found them anyway. Thank you, I said to her. She looked at me. The Varii did not act for humanity. I know, I said, thank you anyway. Something in her face did the structural equivalent of a smile. She voted for negotiation when the chamber reconvened. Not for humanity. For the precedent, the same reason she'd given 9 months ago in the humid habitat on level 9. The vote was close, but it passed. 8 delegates in favor of formal negotiation. The remaining 21 were divided between delay and opposition, which meant delay won by procedural default. Delay was enough. I stayed in the chamber through 4 more hours of procedural arguments. I answered questions when I was asked. I did not speak when I wasn't. I kept my hands on the table. At hour 5, the senior Drell administrator, who I was going to have to stop thinking of as the senior Drell administrator if we were going to be working in the same building for any extended period, leaned forward and said, with the weight of a species that had been running bureaucracies since before humans had writing, "You cannot simply redraw the boundaries of this body's authority." I looked at him. We didn't redraw anything, I said. We drew our own, there was space. You weren't using it. He was quiet for a long time. Then the session moved on. The outcome was not what any news relay described it as afterward. The popular interpretation, and I read dozens of them over the following weeks, transmitted through the array, filed in the section of the Carver's Manifest labeled Crew Recreation Media, was that humanity had won, that Earth had beaten the conclave, that the exile had been lifted. None of that was precisely accurate. The exile resolution remained on the record. It was not struck. It was not formally reversed. What changed was something more complicated and more permanent than reversal. Humanity was recognized as operating outside the conclave framework, not within it, not readmitted to it, parallel to it. A second table. The language in the formal recognition document called it independent observer participant status with bilateral trade rights. What it meant in practice was that humanity existed in a legal category the conclave had not previously created, too present to ignore, too independent to absorb, too technically compliant to sanction. I was appointed to serve as humanity's permanent out-of-frame representative. I did not love the title. I used it as a tool, which is the only thing a title is actually for. The gate reopened under a modified access framework 2 months after the negotiation proceedings began. Not the old framework, not free and unconditional, the way it had been before the vote. A new framework that required transit notification and cargo declaration, which was, objectively, more bureaucratic inconvenience than before. It was also, objectively, not exile. Carol Devane brought the first ship through from Kepler Bravo on a Tuesday morning. I was at the gate observation window on the Carver when it came through. She was piloting it herself, which I had not expected. Devane was an administrative coordinator, not a pilot, and she had apparently spent 4 months of the exile period acquiring a pilot certification, because there was a problem, and she had decided to solve it the most direct way available. I was beginning to understand why the conclave had found humanity alarming. The ship was unremarkable, cargo hauler, mid-range, slightly older than it should have been given the production dates. It came through the gate and adjusted to station approach trajectory with the particular steadiness of a person doing something difficult with complete composure. Owen was standing beside me at the window, both eyebrows at maximum elevation. "So," he said. "So," I said. We watched the ship dock. The Keth never acknowledged what they had contributed. The navigation charts remained filed in Protein Ration Inventory Cycle 14. I moved them eventually to a proper archive, still encrypted, still obscured, but in a folder labeled simply Received. No sender. No explanation. The Keth did not explain things. I had stopped expecting them to. One morning, 6 weeks after the negotiation settlement, there was a package outside my quarters on the station. No sender identification. The material of the outer wrapping was a texture I didn't recognize, something that felt like woven water, if that was a meaningful description. Inside pens, 7 of them green ink. I stood in the corridor for a while. The station hummed around me, recycled air, distant machinery, the low-frequency sounds of a working space habitat that never fully went quiet. Then I put the pens in my breast pocket and went to my first formal session as outer frame representative. Amma attended. This was noted by 3 different conclave administrative bodies as unusual, all of which filed observations about the Variai's increased session participation, and none of which asked the right questions about why. In the recess between the morning and afternoon sessions, she found me in the side corridor off the main chamber. The same corridor she had walked through 9 months ago, the night of the original vote, without looking up. "The conclave's historical division has been reviewing the founding charter," she said. "I know," I said. The legal committee's work had been circulating for a week. The permanence clause question had come up faster than 14 months, more like 5, because I had cited it in Document 7, and citing it had accelerated the review. "They will find 3 additional provisions they had not previously considered," she said. I looked at her. Did you know about those provisions before the original vote? She met my eyes. The Varii have been members of this body for 400 years, she said. We have read the charter more than once. I thought about that, about 4 centuries of watching from a distance, about the sealed descent, about the navigation charts left in a supply crate with no return address, about the trade agreement that gave us relay access at exactly the moment we needed it. You were never just watching, I said. Watching is an active practice, she said. When you have been watching long enough, you know where to stand when the moment requires it. She went back into the chamber. I stood in the corridor for a moment. The walls here were plain, no atmospheric sensors, no color-shifting technology, just the bare material of a structure built to last, showing its age in the places where the seams had been repaired and repaired again. I thought about the 2 ships that hadn't made it through the gate. The formal record I had submitted, the one that registered them not as losses but as the reason, had been accepted into the outer frame registry without comment. The clerk who processed it had asked me for a purpose code. I had said, "So they are in the record." He had entered it and stamped the form and moved on to the next filing. The document existed now. In the record. Permanent, the way records are permanent when they are filed correctly in a system that intends to outlast the people who built it. Their names were in it, the crew manifests, the jump coordinates, the failure reports, written in the dry language of gate authority documentation. And underneath all of it in the purpose field, so they are in the record, so it is not just a number. Nina came to find me at the end of the day. She had been running diagnostics on the array, the asteroid array, now formally registered as civilian communication infrastructure, no longer requiring concealment. Signal quality is up 14% since we came out of cover mode, she said. Turns out pretending to be background noise was costing us bandwidth. I looked at her. Good. Earth wants to talk tomorrow, she said. Secretary General's office. Something about the outer frame framework and trade priority scheduling. I'll take it in the morning. She nodded, turned to go, and then paused. HFY. Yes. We did it right, she said it simply. The way you say a thing you've been carrying for 9 months and need to put down just for a second. We actually did it. I thought about the gate. Open now. Not the way it used to be, but open. I thought about Carol Devane piloting that cargo hauler through with her new certification and her complete composure. I thought about Owen finding a route in a dead corridor at 3 in the morning. I thought about Nina building a voice in the frequencies nobody was listening for. I thought about the cold question I had kept at the edge of my thinking since the night of the vote. Whether humanity had deserved to survive this. Whether 29 civilizations that had watched us for 30 years and chosen exile without hesitation had seen something real. I didn't have an answer to that. I had learned to stop expecting clean answers to questions that size. What I had instead was a second table, a door built from inside a wall, a record with names in it instead of numbers. A line drawn across the stars in legal filings, and encrypted frequencies, and 9 months of borrowed time. And it was holding. Yes, I said, we did. She nodded, left. I went to find the window at the end of the corridor. The same window I had stood at on the night the gate closed, watching the stars with a cup of bad tea and an inconvenient refusal to accept a verdict. The gate was visible from here, lit now in its operational colors, not the dark structure it had been for 9 months. I put my hand in my breast pocket, green ink, 7 pens still there, still full. I uncapped one. I had filings to prepare for tomorrow's session. The outer frame framework was new and untested and would require constant work to maintain, not a victory exactly, but a position, a place to stand, a line in the record that said, here we are. We were not only a number, we drew our own line and it held. Not my first funeral, I thought. But this one came with a window. And outside it, the stars, indifferent, numerous, crossed now with a line that 8 billion people had drawn the only way human beings know how to draw anything that matters. Badly, stubbornly, in green ink. Together,